do it at 9:30 tomorrow morning also.
All right. The defendant is remanded to the custody of the Colleton County Sheriff's Department. And he may be taken away.
There you heard it, guilty on all counts. This is a resounding victory in favor of prosecutors in 2 hours and 50 minutes, a very short period of time. The defendant is facing the maximum sentence. Brian Buckmeier, we're going to keep going on with this. You know, we were talking earlier that if the jury comes back and finds him guilty, you know, we've handled a lot of murder cases and things of that nature. This has got to be now the sickest and most twisted thing. He no longer has the presumption of innocence once he's sentenced. And we are talking about a guy who, obviously the jury believed, did this in order to get himself out of trouble with respect to his financial crimes. It doesn't get any more horrible than that, Brian. What are your thoughts?
I mean, go through it. So we're not, like you said, we're no longer presuming him innocent. So you kill your son, that's bad in and of itself. You kill your wife, just as bad in and of itself as well. But you do it because the walls are closing in on you because of financial reasons, because of a problem that you put yourself in through stealing from your firm, stealing from your clients as attorneys. I know we take that very personally. We take an oath not to do these things, but you violate that oath. And then for some reason, you just lie upon lie upon lie. If the jury got this correct, and we have to presume that they do until maybe there's an appeal and we maybe find something else out, I don't know. But right now, the idea is this is a level of evil, and I do not use that word lightly, that I have not seen in this type of way.
Yeah, and Jeanette, to Brian's point, I mean, you can handle a lot of cases, and you know, yeah, murder is bad, and I know that there's no one better murder than another, but this one has this certain thing to it where the reason why it was done, many times you can understand it, but we've been talking on the network for the last couple of weeks that the motive is so difficult to even believe, but apparently the jury bought it. So, I mean, what does this say to you in terms of how horrible this is?
Oh, no, that's yours.
Well,
yes.
Okay, so did the jury buy the financial motive? They didn't have to buy that to find him guilty. They just had to believe he did it.
Fair enough.
Right? So do they believe it was the financial stuff, or do they believe it was the boat case, or the drugs, or a combination of the boat of the two? Remember, he was not feeling well that Sunday. He was in the hotel room in Columbia, and Maggie said they were at the ball game, and she said, just stay in there if you don't feel well, you know. And they were asking him if he was trying to detox. He had tried to detox in the past by himself, which is a terrible idea, because I can just tell you, because my mom is a chemical dependency therapist, and I've done tons of stories on the opioid epidemic. That stuff is just really bad when you get addicted to it, and you really need medication to help ease those withdrawal symptoms. And that's really something that needs to be done under the supervision of a doctor, because it's painful. You know, Bob, if you don't mind, I think we should ask Chris about the sentencing here. And like, first of all, Chris, your reaction to this verdict, you know, the guilty verdict.
I was surprised with such a lengthy trial, how quickly the verdict came back. I thought that suggested that it was going the way of the prosecution. I didn't anticipate a not guilty on all counts to happen so quickly. Mm-hmm. So the government won, and they apparently won in an overwhelming fashion, because the jurors did not have that much to debate after 6 or 7 weeks of trial.
Tell me about what's going to happen at sentencing and what the options are for sentencing. We heard Judge Newman say, you know, 30 years, could be life in prison without parole. I'm thinking it's going to be life in prison without parole. Your thoughts?
So he was convicted of 2 counts of malice murder, and in South Carolina, malice murder carries a minimum of 30 years to life, and that is There's no parole, so 30 years means 30 years. The judge could give a minimum of 30 years. I don't anticipate that. Judge Newman is not known as a light sentencer.
Right.
Some judges will do consecutive time for each victim in a double homicide case. So he conceivably, if he did that, could give 30 years for Paul and 30 years for Maggie consecutive. We'll see. If he did 30 and 30, it would be 60. Alex Murdaugh, that's effectively a life sentence for Alex Murdaugh unless the case is reversed on appeal or at post-conviction. But he could very easily give consecutive life sentences.
What are the options for appeal? Because Linda Cudney-Bodden and I were talking about this on the air yesterday, and she said because, as far as the, financial motive stuff, the other acts, if you will, the bad acts, the evidence that was allowed in to prove motive, he took the stand and was questioned, so he can't really appeal on that. But what is the law here in South Carolina on this?
Well, I don't know what all went on the record in chambers, and it could very easily there could have been some statement that he would not have testified had the 404B not been admitted. And then the appellate lawyers can debate over whether or not that is valid to preserve the issue or not. And there are some clients who are forced to testify based on rulings that occur earlier in the trial, and they ought to have that issue reviewed by the appellate court. So that'd be an interesting issue. I think the cell phone expert, air quote expert, who tossed a phone around over the weekend and was allowed to testify as an expert, doesn't meet any standard for expertise. Whether that would ever amount to reversible error or not. So for people watching, there's error, and then there's error that might change the outcome. And you really have to show error that might change the outcome. So it's not enough that there might be a ruling that was wrong, but it has to be a ruling that was wrong with some significance to be able to win a new trial. And so, but there will be issues. There were lots of objections, lots of limitations on evidence, and there will be a lot for the appellate lawyers to work with.
So, Bob, that's what Chris Adams has to say about this. He's a defense attorney here in South Carolina.
Okay. What do you think, Brian? I had a lot of the same questions I wanted to ask Chris, but he answered a lot of them. But do you want to comment on any of that?
I think so. I've always said I think he's going to be found guilty, but I think that there are enough appellate issues that there is a really good chance that we might be back here 4 or 5 months from now talking about Alex Murdaugh 2.0. You've been talking about the 404B evidence. We also the 2021 evidence where they say he opened the door. One of them, maybe not enough to appeal, but you get so many of these. I got to think to myself, if they do come back with a new trial, what's it going to look like without bits and pieces of this testimony?
Well, this is something I'd like to know from Chris to answer that. My question to him, and Jeanette, if you could please convey it, is
yes.
What is the likelihood at this point in time that the parties go to the table to work out a global resolution of all these cases?
So, Bob Bianchi wants to know, and this is something I have a little bit of insight into this, Bob, just FYI. What is the likelihood that both parties come to the table and come to a global resolution on the financial crime stuff? Also, we need to keep in mind he's still facing conspiracy charges for narcotics with cousin Eddie, too. So what is the possibility that there's a global resolution to all the financial stuff?
No, to the whole thing, Anjanette. The murder. I'm sorry to cut you off, Anjanette.
To life tomorrow. Then I cannot.
No, I know he can't.
He wants to know the murder. He wants to know the murder. Bob wants to know the murder. All of it. All of this stuff together. Is there a global resolution? I mean,
I don't think it's possible. I think he'll be sentenced tomorrow. It will be a heavy sentence, and then there will be decisions made by the prosecution after that. There's a possibility they could work in negotiation, but if it isn't, there's no reason for the Attorney General to do that.
So there's your answer, Bob. No reason. We had heard some rumblings that there was a plea offer at one point in time to resolve everything for 30 years. and that was rejected, that offer.
Well, you know, when Brian, when Chris says there's no reason to do it, having been a prosecutor that used to do global resolutions all the time, the reason you do it is you say to the guy, you're going to be spending the rest of your life in jail on the murder case. You've confessed to all the financial crimes in your defense when you took the stand. So we wrap it all up and get it over with. And if you want to do the right thing, then do the right thing by ending this whole thing so that the families and everybody doesn't have to go through it again. I don't know. Would you think I mean, I've always been approached after a conviction for a global resolution.
So it makes sense to me for what you're saying. I don't want to correct Chris, because I don't know the courts down there, but you're right. In the experience that I've seen where cases where you either take a heavy plea and your client has another case, you come up and say, hey, my client is going to do 2 life sentences. How much more jail time can he put in? Give me the highest number that you want for the financial crimes. Give me the highest number that you want for the drug conspiracy, the 2021 shooting. Whatever number you give me, my client's going to be in for the rest of his life. So why not just kill the cases rather than continuing on? But if this AG's office doesn't operate that way, because I've never negotiated with this office, it wouldn't make sense to me, but it's their prerogative to do whatever they want.
Where's Josh?
He's at the.
Well, I know there's some activity going on there with Anjanette, and she's doing a lot of stuff. Anjanette, just real quick, between you and Chris, I'm curious, maybe the reason there's not a plea offer, and we were talking about this before with Brian, is because this defendant recognized he's Murdaugh, he's going to be spending the rest of his life in jail, and it's not about that. It's about him vindicating himself and his reputation that I didn't kill my son and I didn't kill my wife, and he's not going to take a deal because he wants to go on appeal with this 404 evidence. What do you think? What does Chris think?
You know, do you think that part of the reason he didn't take a deal for all of this, including the homicides, was because he thought, I'll go, I'll roll the dice. They thought it was a defensible case, and then possibly he appeals on the 404B evidence. But Linda Kenny-Bodden had said yesterday that that's done because he testified. But what is the law down here in South Carolina about that?
I think it's going to be what's on the record. I would never want to put my fate in the hands of the appellate courts, and I don't mean that disrespectfully to the appellate courts, but I don't think you ever want to reject a decent plea offer if you did it hoping that you have good appellate issues. So it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out on appeal. I think his leverage to negotiate a global resolution ended about 15 minutes ago, before the jury came in. Until they knock on the door and come in and read their verdict, you can work something out. But once that happens, there's no incentive for the state to
Anjanette,
negotiate.
Right, they won.
Ask him this. I'm taking a completely 180-degree turn from that. I think Murdaugh does not want to take a deal. I think Murdaugh wants to be found either not guilty. He knows he's spending the rest of his life in jail. He wanted vindication for the murder of his wife and son. So for him, he won't take a deal because he wants to rely on the 404 on appeal.
Bob thinks that he didn't want to take the deal because he wanted to be vindicated. You know, that there's the reputational aspect of this. We heard that testimony about how he was very concerned, possibly more than his other siblings, about the family legacy. His number one priority after the homicides, according to Marion Proctor, was clearing Paul's name, not finding the killers. So the appeal on the 404B evidence, though,
So I think the bigger question is, why would he go to trial if he could have resolved it, especially when he had so much liability on the financial crimes? And, you know, he has people in his family who believe in his innocence. And what the jury just found isn't going to change that or shake that. And those are his support. Those are the people he loves and cares about the most. And I don't know what the future holds, but I would anticipate that they're going to fight for him for years to come, and not accept that the jurors got it right. The rest of Colleton County may accept that the jurors got it right, but those closest to Alec are going to believe him for a while, and he'll be able to litigate about whether he had a fair trial or not.
Yeah, and Brian, thank you.
There you go, Bob.
Yeah, Brian, this is exactly what I'm saying, though. See if you work with me on this and we're in studio, it's a little easier. That's exactly the point. He's going to be going into jail. He knows that. That's why he got on the stand and confessed to crimes that he knew would put him in jail for the rest of his life. Why would he do it? He knows he's going down, but he doesn't want to go down as a murderer. And when you're in jail, Brian, you know, I know, having family support and people that believe you, whether right or wrong, and trying to be vindicated on appeal is a big deal.
Yeah, I mean, going to jail is one thing. Going to jail for a specific thing is a completely different thing. Being a murderer in jail, the way that the guards will treat you, the way that the other inmates will treat you, and the way that your family may or may not treat you is also a big component. Family visiting individuals who are incarcerated can make that life sentence feel a lot shorter. But being isolated in a jail when your family believes that you killed your wife and your son is a much different sentence. That's just for the average, ordinary person. The one thing that I definitely think is true about this case, and I mean, maybe not the one thing, but multiple things, Alex Murdaugh has a high sense of pride. And I think that the punishment of him knowing that he is guilty of these murders is a punishment far greater than any amount of years in jail. And so I think he's really going to try to push hard on trying to win that appeal. And then maybe, as you're saying, I don't take a global disposition. I fight this appeal, clear my name, and then I go and resolve the other cases.
Yeah, I think this is a fascinating question because the possibility of a global resolution, I think, is going to be more thwarted by Murdaugh than I think it is by prosecutors, but we're only speculating. Murdaugh may come out, but you made a point. I was thinking about this before, and you articulated it so well, and I think it's really important. Murdaugh's an attorney, or was an attorney. There is different kinds of time you do in jail, and I'd like you just to tell the audience a little bit more about the difference of maybe a financial fraud guy is one thing, but killing your wife and kid, that in the code of conduct, if you will, in a prison can make your life almost segregation eligible.
Yeah, I mean, it's a number of things. So he volunteered as a prosecutor. My first thought is, are any of the people that he prosecuted going to be in that jail with him, right? Maybe, maybe not. The other thing is, as much as those people who are not in jail, who have never spent time in jail, may think, well, one criminal is just as equally bad as the other criminal. No, there's a hierarchy. There's a standard in there. You killing your wife, that's bad. But clear across the board, you killing your son and doing it in this manner, jail, they have TV, they have news, they know who's about to walk in, probably tonight, if not first thing in the morning, and they're waiting for Alex Murdaugh. And so being in jail for a financial fraudster as a former attorney, he's gonna be living a lavish life. He's gonna be in there probably writing appeals for his other inmates. He's gonna be giving them information on the law library. It's a much cushier life. His family's gonna come and visit him. He'd probably even still have access to Maggie's estate because he's not convicted of murdering her. A little bit of extra money while he's in there. It's a better life. But being found guilty of killing your wife and son, the way that others will treat him, he'll probably be in segregated population. He's not gonna interact with people. Being in jail just by yourself with no one visiting because they believe you killed your family, different life altogether.
Yeah, so what do you think is the conversation going on right now between the attorneys and their client at this point? Because they've suffered a profound defeat in such a short verdict.
I think the conversations be very pointed. They all know what's the next step. It's gonna be the conversation of what do we do next? What are we filing? How are we gonna file? What are the issues? What are we gonna argue? When can we get this to the appellate court? Can we, he's remanded, so there's not gonna be the conversation of can we change the bail so that I can get out while we're doing this appeal? Sometimes that comes up, but I don't think that's an option here. I think right now they're laser focused on next steps. Obviously they're gonna be going through, okay, this is what's gonna happen when you go to incarceration. I think Alex already probably knows that because he's been coming in and out of the jail to do this trial. But those are the conversations you have with your client after they've been convicted. This is what I'm gonna do for you. This is what Monday morning is gonna look like. I'm gonna be filing this. I'm gonna be talking to this. We're gonna argue this. This is what the jail process is gonna look like. Okay, you're gonna be in jail till then. We're going to have the sentencing. This is how we're going to try to argue 30 years. This is how we're going to try to get away from the life sentence. This is how we're going to try to get away from the consecutive sentence. Those are the conversations, as you know, Bob, they're going to be having right now in the probably next 24 to 48 hours.
You know, Brian, in a case like this, there's a lot of intense emotions, and I'm just curious. I know I'm asking you to spitball here, but sometimes the client can become very agitated with the lawyers. They can never accept responsibility for what it is that they did. They blame the manner in which the lawyers tried the case. What do you think that relationship looks like right now? Are they bonding and getting stronger together, or is that antipathy starting between them where he's going to start blaming the lawyers for the loss?
I think it really depends on how the lawyer gears that conversation. The way that I'm articulating as to how I expect it to happen would be thinking about next steps. When you have that conversation with your client and you're not just like, oh, the jury got it wrong, oh, the judge made a bad call, shouldn't let that evidence in, you just become a part of that, I don't want to say pity party, but they start going down the rabbit hole as to everything that's wrong. And eventually, when you start going, the jury got it wrong, the prosecutor did this wrong, the judge got it wrong, your name's going to come up in that conversation. So in my mind, a responsible attorney and one who's always fighting for your client up until the very, very, very end, because this isn't the end, this is a end, not the end. The conversation should be, here are the issues. This is where I'm going to fight. I would even say Monday morning, Friday morning, this is what I'm filing. We're going to make these arguments to reduce the sentence, but I don't even really care about the sentence because that will not be your sentence, because we will fight this in the appellate court and we will find victory, or at least attempt to find victory in here, here, and here. That, you hope, galvanizes your client, really refocuses them on not the next couple of days and hours, because they're going to be miserable. Getting booked into a jail when you know you're going to have a potential sentencing come up for a long, long period of time. I mean, what Alex Murdaugh said is in his early to mid 50s, 30 years, yet alone 60 years is a potential life sentence because, yeah, the life expectancy of the average male is what, 80 some odd years, but that's not jail years, right? The healthcare in the jails are not gonna be the same. So it's really about prospectively how you're gonna fight from in the future.
Yeah, so the press conference is obviously about to happen here. I guess we can anticipate it's gonna be the normal kind of thing, but how do you think prosecutors are feeling tonight? Obviously good that they won their case. But I'm wondering, are they thinking of it like doing the financial crimes case as soon as possible, wait for the appeal on the murder case to be over with? Because they put their financial case in pretty quickly, and now they have his confession on the witness stand. Would it make sense to just jump right at it and go to it?
I think today, like Thursday is the new Friday for the prosecutors. I think they're going to take this time to celebrate, weekend, not think about it, decompress. And I think Monday, the smart thing to me would be, get that financial crime case done. Because if you can convict him of it, and he might be more inclined to take it now, especially because he's testified to it, if they do, and this is I think it's possible, in their minds it probably is a big if they do get the case overturned, and the judge says you should not have allowed this financial crime information in because it's a previous bad act, not a previous conviction, at least this way they get to get a second bite of the apple and be like, well, this time you might have overturned this because it wasn't a conviction. Now it is a conviction. We can bring it under different grounds, and we might not get an appeal in the same way we did before. I say get that financial crime in and get the conviction to strengthen it no matter what.
Yeah, this is a hard sentencing judge, right? So if you go forward with that financial case and you get walloped, which knowing as a lawyer, that is going to be what we call an aggravating factor over and over and over again. He's going to get hammered with that. Brian, I think you would agree with me, probably a sentence commensurate to a life sentence anyway. Then the prosecutor has far more power down the road should the murder conviction be reversed. Is that pretty much where you're at?
Absolutely. Because right now, I think for the prosecution, they're probably not, well, actually, I think they are probably thinking about the appeal. I think if they're intelligent, and I know them to be based on their presentation of the case, they've got to think, even if there's a 2% chance this case gets appealed, how do I make this ironclad? And the way that I perceive it to be is you get that financial crime conviction. Because either one, like you said, hard sentencing judge is going to give him so many years that he's probably going to be dissuaded from trying to retry this case. If you're sitting in jail, I think the exposure is up to 700 years, especially if you're looking consecutive charges. If you're in jail for centuries because of the financial crimes, are you really going to want to roll the dice on these two murder cases? Maybe not. And if you're convicted of the financial crimes and you got an appeal because we weren't allowed to use the financial crimes because they were not convictions yet, well, now we have it as convictions. You know what happened when we were able to use the financial crimes. You're just going to get convicted again. So I say, no matter how you think of the appellate court's going to do, get the financial crimes in, lock in that conviction no matter what happens in the appeal.
See, I love this conversation because this is strategic, okay? This is what prosecutors and lawyers do all the time in order to try to maximize and leverage benefits. Brian, overall, very fast verdict. Obviously, that's surprising. But what struck you the most about this case?
I'm still hung up on the motive. And I think, I know what it is. It's completely my bias. I'm a new father of 7 months. I'm looking at the time now, and my son just went to sleep, and I'm missing it because we're doing this, but I love being here with you, Bob. I'm going to wake him up at 5 o'clock in the morning and hold him. And every time I hold my son, I think about this case. I think to myself, how? I've seen plenty of murder cases with children, plenty of murder cases with mother or husband killing the wife or wife killing the husband. But now as a new father, I think to myself, this blows my mind that over dollars and cents you would kill your wife, and I hold my son and you kill your son. I'm still struggling with that motive, but obviously the jury wasn't.
Listen, the jury has spoken, Brian, but when we were off camera and waiting for the verdict to come in, we were having a problem struggling with the motive ourselves, and we were talking about instances where it appeared to be one way and it turned out to be something else. And me and you came up with some theories, right? We debated some theories of what makes more sense in the evidence. Do you think that there's down the road going to be newly discovered evidence or something that may shed light? I'm not saying that he didn't do it. I'm not saying he's not responsible, but that we did not hear the whole story from him or the government's witnesses.
Yeah, all right, I'll put it right out there. This is me just pulling ideas out of the air. I think that Alex Murdaugh was involved in the murders. I do not believe him to be the trigger man. I believe that when he says they did him so bad, that his belief is that maybe the prosecution got it a little right, that if Alex hired someone to rough up Paul, not knowing that Maggie was there, that there would be some level of sympathy to the case because of all of these threats. That when he mentions to the law enforcement that there were these threats, he's already planting the idea that other people could have done this, because a Paul Murdaugh with a black eye and maybe some broken kneecaps, that does the job of getting out from the financial crimes. But I think Paul maybe would have fought back. He got shot. Maggie, being the mother that we've heard her testify to, then runs in, and then the people that Alec maybe coordinated trying to kill them or trying to rough them up said, hey, I killed one, why not kill the other? I think that Alec was involved, and that makes more sense based on where the guns were. They probably took the guns with them. Where are the bloody clothes? They're probably wearing the bloody clothes because of other people. I think he was involved based on what I saw. I'm not quite sure if he was the trigger man, and to your point, more evidence could be that other trigger people are found, or a gun is found, or someone snitches, or some jailhouse informant or whatever, and we find other evidence of other participants. That tend to make more sense to me than the financial crimes. He did it, changed his clothes in this short period of time, no forensics on him.
And the case and everything's Brian's crazy here. I mean, we were actually talking about a real live case where something that I previously handled was very much like it. It looked like it was this. The person was involved. And Brian, the reason why they don't confess this on the witness stand is it would make them guilty of felony murder, because nevertheless, someone died during the course of a felony, so that doesn't get them off the hook. And he's got to worry about the rest of his family being in danger as well, so it could be covering for somebody. But to your point, maybe it was supposed to be this and it turned out to be that, and it just got out of control.
One more to us.
Go ahead.
It's pride still. Because whether he kills them or he hires someone to kill them, it's still a point of pride that he was involved. He cannot do that based on his own ego, I think.
Well, I'd be interested with our YouTube viewers and people that watch stuff here at the Law and Crime Network if they think that there's a possibility. We haven't really heard the whole story here because it's jumping up to me and you in a very similar way. Okay, we're being told here that Alex Murdaugh turned around to Buster and said, "It's okay." Gigi McKelvey, South Carolina. Okay, I'm being told, yes, of course, with the Law and Crime Network, a correspondent for us out there. So he tells Buster it's okay. Obviously, that's what he's going to say to him. Buster may know what's really going on here. He may know the whole story. Maybe, Brian, this is the whole story.
Yeah. I've already gone down I've already had my tinfoil hat on.
No,
what
you
it is.
don't.
I might take it off for just a second. I think that this is a father consoling his son. We've seen Buster testify. We've seen Buster in the audience, and we've also probably seen this a lot in our own cases. Our client takes a plea, a lot of jail time. They turn back to their loved ones, and they're the ones consoling them because it is them who are leaving their family. And so I think this more, in my mind, is Alex saying it's going to be okay. Really, he's trying to console his son, who's probably, I mean, don't forget, I think the biggest victim here is Buster. His mother's dead, his brother's dead, and now his father's in jail. It's just Buster. So I think this is a last-ditch effort of a father trying to be a father after he's convicted of being anything but.
Yeah, I was going to say, so, you know, we normally cover these cases, and we always say that the child lost a mother, they lost a father. But it usually happens with younger children in the cases that we cover here, gavel at the Law and Crime Network. But he's a little older, so you can kind of maybe miss that permutation. But nevertheless, he lost everything through this, and I guess we'll continue to support his father because of that closeness. Do you think, and I asked you to spitball here, do you think Buster believed his father's story, or does Buster know that something his father was involved in something that wasn't right?
I don't know. Again, let's put the tinfoil hat back on. I honestly think that he loves his father. I think he loves his father with all of his heart, and I think that love can blind you to the faults of even the people you're closest to. And I think that is no fault of Buster. I think that is exactly how a son should love his father, and I think that's a testament to their relationship. But you can be a great father to a son, and as a jury has decided here, a murderer of another son and a wife. And I think that may be what we're seeing from Buster. I'm not sure if Buster believes him. I think that Buster loves him, and he loves him at such a degree that it may be hard, if not impossible, to see his father as anything else but innocent.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes that can be true, and if it's the only one you've got, you love the one you're with, as it were, kind of. But I really am interested, for those of you who are interested, going on and chatting with us to let us know, is there something more here that we didn't know? Are we on to something? I don't think Brian's wearing a tinfoil hat, because I lived one of these cases, and it sounded bizarre, and you think this person's the victim, and it turns out they got somebody else to try to harm, but it went somebody so that they could get something from somebody else, and then it got out of control, and then 2 people got shot. Is it possible? Could that explain some of the inconsistencies? Could that explain the weak motive, in my opinion? It's just something that got completely out of control. Let us know, and hopefully we see if we get some of our producers to take a look and see where we're at. So, Brian, what do we expect as far as, let's go through the legalities of it. There's certain motions that are going to have to be filed. I know the court, the defense attorneys made a motion when the verdict came in. Can you talk to us a little bit about what that was? I think it's pretty much a formality, and what happens here from the legal process.
So what I'm surprised that both sides are saying we'll be ready tomorrow. I would have expected a greater amount of time so they can prepare, because while there is maybe only legally or technically a difference between 30 years in jail as opposed to life, especially because now we're learning that in South Carolina there's no parole. 30 years is 30 years. I would have expected that both sides would have had a pre-sentencing report. They would have filed motions to either revisit some of the legal arguments, specifically admissions of evidence into this case. I think they might have preserved enough of the issue. And when we say preserve the issue, it's one of those, if you don't use it, you'll lose it. You have to make the arguments that the judge either made some sort of evidentiary or ruling error so that the appellate court can review it. Because at this point, Judge Newman has decided. There's no, I'm a soccer fan, so there's no VAR, there's no further review within this judge, but you have to make sure that there's enough arguments that you can lay the groundwork for the appeal. In terms of legal arguments for this judge, I think they've exhausted all of those. I think the motion practice as to how the trial when is going to start. I think when the sentencing is done, and maybe this is why they're doing it so close in time, they're probably going to try to argue that the sentencing is too egregious. Don't forget, Alex Murdaugh has no criminal record. Arguably speaking, this is, I don't know if I'd argue, but this is a horrible murder.
I'm sorry to cut you off, Brian. I see that there's some activity that's going on, I think in an area where they believe that we're going to see the defendant coming outside. So the law enforcement authorities, as you can see here, yeah, he's coming out right now trying to keep the reporters and people away. let's just give our audience an opportunity that are watching at least to see this. This is now convicted defendant Alex Murdaugh, no longer presumed innocent, facing life without the possibility of parole at sentencing. And here he is. Well, slow. He's coming. I'm told it's very slow. Take a look at his face. But just he could tell he was nervous. He was scared. He was beaten up when he was in that courtroom and that verdict was being read. I thought he was going to actually pass out. He had that look. See if he's recovered at all after having spoke to his attorneys inside the courthouse, I'm sure, preparing for sentencing tomorrow. It's no longer a perp walk, Brian. It is a convicted felon walk. Convicted of killing, unbelievable, his wife and his son. You know, law enforcement's got a tough job here too, Brian, to make sure that no harm comes to him, believe it or not, right? Protecting these guys can be difficult in circumstances like this.
Absolutely, got to keep their head on a swivel, because it's not just, is the now convicted felon going to try to run or maybe try to hurt me? And I don't think that would happen with Murdaugh. But are people going to try to get to Murdaugh, and their job is to make sure that he's safe? And it's interesting.
I see that one of the officers has got his pink handcuffs in the back of his pants. Very
Yep.
stylish. Haven't seen pink handcuffs.
Pink is in now.
Pink is in. It's the new new handcuff look.
Pink is the new black.
All right, here he is. And there he goes. Okay, Brian. So, not good. That guy.
Yeah, like I was saying, the defense, we know the defense what they're aiming for. They're aiming for 30 years, the lowest sentence, to run concurrently. So both murders running at the same time. The prosecution is probably going to be looking to get 2 life sentences to run consecutively. So what arguments are going to get you there as a defense attorney? I think at the end of the day, because of the heinousness of the crime, and then we're getting some insider information that this is not a judge who sentences lightly, we're probably leaning closer to the prosecutor. So I think on top of any arguments for appeal, they're also going to probably make an 8th Amendment argument that a first-time offender should not get the higher range of sentencing, and they'll add that to their argument as well to try to reduce any jail time.
Yeah, and you make all great points, and that's why you're a great defense attorney, but I am sure prosecutors are going to spin around to talk about this guy who's an attorney, an officer of the court, defrauding people, because it's still part of the case. It's part of the res gesta. It's part of the motive of the case, and did this specifically to keep himself out of legal trouble. I think this kind of judge, when I say this kind of judge, a conservative, you know, hard sentencing judge, is going to look at that as a major aggravating factor. And of course, Brian, you know this as well, in most states, there's a doctrine called no free crime. In other words, you know, each defendant should be charged for each of the victims. So I see this as a much different case that way. I know you're making the defense argument. In the end, what do you think the judge does? I say he consects them.
I think he consects, yeah. And when we say consec, we're saying putting them together one after another, so either 30 and 30 or life and life. And I also heard that if he gets life, I kind of caught this with Judge Newman, if he gets life on the any of the murder charges, the gun charges can also be run consecutively as well, so they're pushing it even further out. I think he gets it. And I think the argument the defense is going to make is he's a first-time offender. Look at all the positive he did as an attorney prior to his fall from grace. It's like a lot of the police officer cases that we see, where there was good before they were bad. But I think that the bad far outweighs any good that he probably did in his past, and I think that's where we get, I wouldn't be surprised if we get 2 life sentences run consecutively.
I mean, we're 2 seasoned trial attorneys, and I think we agree, and I think everybody that's been analyzing this case, from a homicide perspective, as both a prosecutor and defense lawyer, I don't think I've seen anything as twisted as a motive as this. I mean, and when I say twisted, I mean for such a self-absorbed thing that didn't have to happen, and to do that to 2 people that you're supposed to love and protect makes this, I think, one of the worst homicide cases I've either been involved with, and I've had some bad homicide cases. It's the reason it happened that bothers me the most, and why I think the judge is going to hammer him.
Absolutely. We know that Alex Murdaugh is legally wrong. Why? The jury gave us the verdict. We know that it is. But there's also a sense of morality. There is a sense of morality that when you commit a certain crime for a certain reason, you get punished harder. Murder is bad. And I know that many people say that there are no good or bad murders. I tend to disagree. I think that you murder someone because they stole your wife from you, okay? We can all kind of understand that person's anger, but we all say, you went too far. That's a bad murder. But that's a very different murder than I had financial crimes, so I decided to kill my wife and son. I do think that there are levels to murder. And so the person who killed, and the reason why I know there's levels to murder is because the heat of passion, killing someone for stealing your wife, we literally put in a law that downgrades the jail time that you would get for a heat of passion murder, right? We all agree to that. So there are levels to murder. We even put it in the statutes. But murdering your wife and son, this is Old Testament bad. This is horrible. And so I think that's where you're gonna get the higher sentence. That's where you're gonna get the consec. That's where you're gonna get the life sentences. I think that's where it gets really bad, the morality to it.
Brian, I love the way you just put that. We as a society have recognized that there are certain circumstances that people can kill, but there's some sort of reasonable understanding or justification for it. And that is not here, as obviously we're both alluding to. There's no insurance policy for money. It was just sheer naked to delay or what have you. Why do you think this wasn't a death penalty case?
That's a really good question. I would have put it on the table. I'm a public defender. I'm Canadian. You could probably all guess how I feel about the death penalty in general. But if it's on the books and you have a case this malicious, I would think that the people of South Carolina and Colleton County would have put it on the table. Maybe they thought they wouldn't get it because, hey, we've seen the Parkland shooter and that person wasn't put to death. I think maybe the general tone or tenor of the country is that we're maybe moving away from the death penalty because, and I don't mean to bring in other cases, but if you can kill and injure 17 people in a mass shooting, why would Alex Murdaugh be up for the death penalty? Maybe they went for the target that they could get, and that being the guilty life in prison without parole, rather than trying to overreach. That's the only thing that makes sense to me.
I mean, a death penalty case is much more complex for the prosecutor, but this kind of, let's get into our philosophicals. We had our tinfoil hats on, and I still don't think it's a tinfoil hat idea, but now we'll put our philosophical hats on. This is what people that have a problem with the death penalty, and I've tried death penalty cases, is that you have a guy like we're both saying, it's the sickest motive we've ever encountered in what we've done in our careers or what we covered here, and yet people who have done less get the death penalty, and a guy like this doesn't get it.
Yeah, I mean, that would be my argument. If I'm representing Alex Murdaugh in a death penalty case, I would literally come up and be like, well, is this the Parkland shooting case? No. Is it as bad as that case? No. What did he get? Life. So why should my client get more than him? And I think that would ring true in some people's ears. And that is probably what a lot of defense attorneys are going to be using going forward from the Parkland shooting case. Is it a different state? Yes. Is it different circumstances? Yes. Is it different aggravating circumstances? Of course. But that argument still exists, and that's what we as defense attorneys do. If this person is this bad and got this, then my guy should get less. I mean, if you have any siblings, you probably do the same thing too. My sibling wasn't allowed to do this, so I might not be allowed to do it, but if my sibling's allowed to do this, then I should be allowed to do that as well. It's the same concept.
You know, our producer, Christina, has a very prescient and interesting statement talking about the victim impact statements that we anticipate we'll hear at sentencing. Keeping in mind that Buster, as we talked about before, is a victim in the case. Yet, I think we would kind of say he was supportive of the father during the trial. But Brian, he would have a right to speak as a victim in the case. So what do you think we're going to hear?
I think it's going to be very powerful. I think it's going to be interesting. I don't know what we're going to hear, but I will give you the two versions that I think we will hear. We're either going to hear Buster saying, I get what the jury said. I respect the jury's decision. I myself might not be an attorney, but I am the son of one, the grandson of one, the great-grandson of one, and I respect these hollowed halls. And in respecting that, I ask that you give him the lowest sentence, 30 years, run consecutively. Or we're going to get, you guys got it all wrong. My father would never do this. This is not the man that he is. He told you the truth. He did this. I do not think you guys got it right. I'm going to stay tethered to my father and that he is innocent of these crimes and we will fight these crimes, and that's it. I don't know which route he's going to go. Maybe it's a mixture of A and B, but I think those are the two most common or the two most probable things we're going to hear from Buster if he takes the stand as a victim in the victim impact statements.
Yeah, Brian, I had a very negative experience with a court recently on a situation which I felt it was very, very important that the defendant's family have an opportunity to speak prior to sentencing. And at least in our state, the victims and the victim's family has a right to. Certainly everything's within the sound discretion of the court to what extent they're going to allow things. Again, us now defense lawyers, I felt that it was important for the judge to listen to the mother and at least give them the courtesy, the respect to be heard about their son. That didn't happen. Do you expect that we'd see something like that here, though, that people from the Murdaugh family are going to be allowed to testify on behalf of the defendant?